Now, some readers do not give a flying broomstick about characters and skip all the boring emotional stuff to get back to the action. Some readers likewise do not care about setting. It could literally take place in a white room, and as long as the dialogue was sparkling enough and the characters emotional enough, they wouldn't care at all. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean you can skip either one, because there are some readers that care about both. And so setting is probably the thing that I universally give feedback on the most. It's something that there's a strength of my writing. And it's something that I see in other people's writing as being lacking or absent. So one thing that quite often gets overlooked, especially in short fiction, is the background of the world. Quite often, the near distance is described very well. We know everything in the room. We know the kind of cigarettes the character is smoking. We know the flavor of, whiskey that's on the guy's breath. But where is this room? Where is this apartment building? What kind of house? What kind of city? What kind of world? Whether you live in, Las Vegas or Bangor, Maine, or, Fairbanks, Alaska, those are three very different places, and characters are going to behave differently and think about the world differently in those places because of the world that they're in. Also, not to put too fine a point on it, but the political context in which your characters are existing will influence them too. We cannot escape that. And so if you're writing about, a regicide, the political context of that really does matter. And that shows up in all sorts of ways, from taxes to construction zones to, the size of the palace on the horizon. So thinking about that middle and far distance, not just in a physical way, but in a cultural way, can be a really good way to bring your setting to life and to make it more real for the reader. In short fiction, we don't have pages and pages to spend on this, and so you don't need to do hours and hours of research on this. And in nonfiction, you don't necessarily have to spend pages and pages on this if it's not important. But it's important to give the setting and the characters a context in which to exist. A room in a house in a city is not specific enough to tell me things about these characters. And so quite often when I'm saying in feedback is I'm looking for specificity here. I'm looking for, I don't want it to be any town. I want it to be a very specific place that maybe I've never been, that I would love to go to, or that I'm curious about. Make me feel like I'm there. That's part of the joy of reading, is leaving the place that I'm at. So the more specific you can get, the better. That's going to help hypnotize your reader, which is our goal, to hold their attention. Something Dave talked about a lot was the five senses, plus all of the other senses that we use all the time without really being aware of them. Vision is far and away the most frequent thing described in every piece of fiction, I think. Probably not every, but in most fiction, we get lots of visual description, a little bit of sound, and maybe, a hot pocket on page 12, but that's it. And if you really lean into smell or taste, I love reading about textures or vestibular disorientation, especially in science fiction. If you can nail that description, it can really immerse your reader in the world. Shadows tell us a lot about the world that we're not really cognizant of. But if you can bring that into play as your, reader is dealing with the striations of sunlight and shadow as they race through the woods on their motorcycle, that can impact things. And that's an interesting way and a creative way of bringing the setting into your characters' actions and choices. So write it all down is my advice, and then later go back and pick out the most evocative or powerful pieces of it. Don't try to be, concise on your first draft. That's not what first drafts are for. Something else that I comment on frequently in editing, and something I love to see in writing, is something that I touched on when I went earlier, and that is filtering the setting through the character. That ties into both, and I think it's really, really important. to take into account the things that your character would see and pay attention to, the things that your character wouldn't see. A librarian might notice that the books have no sort of order, but a criminal investigator may not notice what order they're in, but he may notice that they're all about the same part of the country. And so they're going to notice and be thinking about, and their brains are automatically going to travel down different paths. So don't overlook that as a means to both character and plot.